Here we are on Ways and Means. It's still February 25th. We are at 1:25. Apologies for anyone who's just tuning in at home, wondering what has been happening in the last 10 minutes. We are taking up H 757, an act relating to manufactured homes and limited equity cooperatives. We received this from the House General Committee. It has a lot of tax policy in it, a lot of things that affect tax policy in it. Particularly some issues around appraisal and property taxation and all kinds of things like that we've spent a lot of time on recently. And so we're going to spend some real time on this bill over the next 2 weeks. And yeah, gonna turn over to Gail to take us through it.
Good afternoon. For the record, Cameron Wood, Office of Legislative Counsel. Happy to walk you through 757 as it came out of the House General Committee. Madam Chair, as you mentioned, the bill itself primarily dealing with manufactured homes, otherwise mobile homes. Throughout the current statutory language, it refers to mobile homes if it was built after a certain date and meets certain federal housing requirements. They're called manufactured homes. But one of the provisions in the bill is actually giving the authority for our office to go through and update the statutory references throughout to manufactured homes. But for starters, I just wanted to share the statutory definition. So we all know exactly what we're talking about here. So this is actually a definition that's in Title 10, which is the chapter related to mobile home parks. Some of these sections are going to apply to these homes, whether they're in a park or not. Some of the sections later on are going to apply to what's called a limited equity cooperative, which we'll talk about that when I get there. Some of the sections are going to apply, like I said, to a manufactured home, whether it's in a park or not. So I just want to start with the definition, but the definition is in Title 10. And it's a mobile home means a structure or type of manufactured home, including the plumbing, heating, air conditioning, electrical systems contained in the structure that is built on a permanent chassis, designed to be used as a dwelling unit with or without a permanent foundation, transportable in one or more sections, and at least 8 foot wide, 40 foot long, and when erected has at least 320 square feet. Or if it was constructed prior to June 15th, 1976, the dimensions of 8 feet wide by 32 feet long. And then, or any structure that meets all the requirements in subdivision 1 except for the size requirements, but it has the certification. It's manufactured home. So we just wanted to start here to kind of define what we're talking about, so we're not talking about RVs or tiny homes or anything like that. There is this statutory definition, and it does have to meet these requirements for the remainder of the sections that we're talking about. So
is the whole rest of the language we're looking at within this title?
This is in Title 10.
Yeah.
The rest of the sections that we're talking about are going to be in different titles,
Okay,
but where appropriate, those titles do reference back to this. Yes, ma'am. Okay. Now we're in the draft itself. These first few sections are going to be dealing with the sale of a mobile home or a manufactured home. I'm going to try my best to use manufactured home. I may use it interchangeably. As I said, it references mobile home in the current statute. These first few sections are about how and amend the process where we're dealing with the sale of a mobile home, whether or not it's in a park. So it doesn't have to be in a park. It could be in a park, but it doesn't have to be. And before I kind of jump into the language, just as a very kind of high level comment, understand that different from kind of a stick built home that's, on a piece of land, a mobile home or a manufactured home is mobile. That's why they initially were called that. As I referenced in the definition, it's built on a chassis that's moved. They're built in, manufactured warehouses and then moved to a location. And then from there, they can be permanently sited such that they will not move after that fact. But not all of them are that way. Some of them still, can be moved after they're, put in the location where they may become permanent. So I'm mentioning that because current statute, you can sell a mobile home either via a bill of sale, or you can purchase it as a mortgage, and it has to be financed as real estate if it meets certain conditions. And so this first section here is amending the definition of permanently sited. And this is important because this permanent siting has an impact of whether something can be financed as real estate or whether it has to be financed as, personal property. And my understanding is it also has implications to the tax treatment of the sale and the tax treatment of the home itself. And I will defer those questions to my colleagues who cover those areas.
The end of the page right before this one, it said, list advertising, sales, display, et cetera, or services, or for any other commercial. So what you mean is not used for living in
So it could be used as a display home.
or display at home?
Right.
Display goods.
Mhm.
It
So
all has to
even-
be related to the actual property. Could you put mobile, or could you put a mobile clinic in there for health services? Would that change what this is?
I guess I'm not following,
Mobile home remains mobile home.
right? So this is saying a
Even
mobile,
if
right?
you're- So all those things are completely connected to the actual mobile home. It's not, I was reading it differently.
Yeah. Yeah, this is just saying that
Any
if
other
you,
commercial purposes.
if you have a,
Any commercial purposes, because it says that.
right,
You could use it to sell bananas, or you could use it to sell canned goods, or you could use it as a store. That's.
Can I back up to your question? Is that
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
So you could run a cannabis business out of here and it would not be used as a domicile, but it would still remain a mobile home for the purposes of this chapter?
so the chapter is about what you have to do when you sell them.
Great.
And so that's how I read it, is if you're using it for some other purpose, if you're going to go sell it, it doesn't become something different. It's still a mobile home for the purposes of the sections in this chapter that deal with how you transfer ownership of that building. That, I hope I'm clarifying.
Right.
I feel clarified.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so we get to this definition of permanently sited, which, like I said, has kind of some implication of when you're giving it, certain tax treatment or whether it's going to be financed in a specific way. And the language here is just clarifying that permanently sited means one or more of the following things. So, currently there was a question from individuals testifying on the bill. There were questions about whether or not all 5 subdivisions had to be met in order for something to be permanently sited. And the committee wanted to specify that not everything in this list has to occur in order for something to be permanently sited. Okay, so we're getting into the next section here, 2604. So this is about deeds. So as I mentioned at the beginning, these things can be sold via bill of sale, or they could be sold via a deed. There is a section that's not here in the bill, but it's in this chapter that says that if an individual owns the property where the home is going to be located, it shall be financed as residential real estate. And then it says, if the person does not own the property where the mobile home is going to be located, it may be financed as residential real estate. So this kind of gives a little bit of flexibility for financing institutions, depending on the circumstances of whether they would be comfortable financing it as a mortgage or financing it as personal property. This has implications because generally speaking, if you finance it as personal property, you may not get the same terms, as you would for financing it under a mortgage. And so that flexibility currently exists, and there's nothing in this draft that changes that specific statutory section that says that. There are some changes here when something is being transferred via a deed. So sub A says if you're buying the home from a dealer on or after July 1, 2008, and it's being financed as residential real estate, it shall be conveyed by a deed. And then there's another section later on that says if somebody is purchasing it via a mortgage, it needs to be transferred via a deed. And then there's another section which we're going to get to in a minute about converting bills of sale over to deeds. So what you all have done in the past is try to move the statute in a direction of treating and transferring the ownership of these properties via deeds.
And I think there's been sort of a long-standing, slow process of us trying to treat manufactured housing with the degree of sort of respect under the law that we treat stick-built housing. And if I think about in the context of the other work we're trying to do to create consistency in appraisals between towns, this is one of the places that I personally have seen like the most anomalies, or the way that we, use the property transfer tax, sort of thinking about that as a consistent frame is how I'm trying to view this bill.
Okay, so what this section is going to do is sub A, if you buy it from a dealer, finances real estate, it has to be conveyed via deed. Sub B, if the owner shall, upon financing or refinancing a mobile home as real estate or selling it as real estate, transfer it via a warranty deed or a quitclaim deed, which is then identified in the section. So that's the first two things about this, A and B. If you're financing as real estate, it has to be transferred via a deed. The recommendation here is to walk that back. So as you can see, first off in the subdivision A, they're striking a requirement about what the deed needs to look like. And I'm going to get to that in just a second as I get down sections. The subdivision B here says that instead of a shall finance it as real estate, it's the owner of a mobile home that is permanently sited may finance it may issue it to the grantee, the person who's buying it, by a warranty deed or a quitclaim deed. So it's no longer a requirement, it's a may. And then I'm going to, pardon the scroll, because I'm going to get us all the way down to a new subdivision E in this section, and then I'm going to come backwards. This new subdivision E is going to go in, that's going to say nothing in this section prevents a mobile home owner from conveying a mobile home by bill of sale or financing or refinancing the mobile home pursuant to this section, notwithstanding whether the mobile home was previously conveyed, financed, or refinanced as residential real estate. So
would that allow something to move between a deed and a bill of sale and then back to a deed, and you'd sort of lose the beautiful title history?
You're taking the words out of my mouth. I was going to phrase it slightly differently, but yes, currently there's statutory language that says if it's treated as a deed, then it's treated as a deed throughout from there on. There's no going backwards to then treat it as a bill of sale afterwards and treat it as personal property. What this subsection would do is kind of remove that requirement, and it would allow individuals who have financed it via a deed, if they're going to transfer ownership to someone new afterwards, they could then do it via bill of sale, not via deed.
Yeah, this is a question for cameras. Do you know why the committee decided to go that route?
I guess I'd love for you to talk to the committee
yeah.
and find that out.
Yeah, is there, seems strange that we should treat the transfer of property differently based on how it's financed.
We don't do that for other property.
That's why this sounds strange. Right, that was my point.
So at the start, they are slightly different in the sense that they're mobile. You know, as I mentioned in the very beginning, I mean, you can come into this state or go into another state and buy a mobile home and then take it out of state and move it somewhere else. So they're not, you know, in all instances permanently affixed to property. And, you know, so historically, they weren't treated as, you know, typical, you know, kind of real estate and given deeds because they kind of live in this hybrid existence of it's a piece of personal property that you can live in. And so I agree with your point, and that was one of the comments I made a minute ago. It seems like, at least in my reading of the statute over time, this body has determined that under certain circumstances, when it really seems to be more appropriate to treat it as if it's a real property, piece of real property, then we're going to treat it as real property and we're going to make it be transferred via deed from there moving forward. And this section would kind of be, I don't want to say going backwards, but it would be going in a different direction of then kind of giving flexibility for the owner to transfer it via either a bill of sale or a deed.
I don't want this to be like a red herring, but like people actually move stick built buildings too. It's like sort of, it's charming when you see it, right? But it's hard. And it's harder, but it happens. It's more expensive. It's actually quite expensive to move a
Yeah.
manufactured home as well.
Okay. So these next few sections, I will point out a change that the General and Housing Committee is recommending. If you remember the section A and the section B, subsection A and B says if you're buying it from a dealer and you're financing it as real estate after 2008, shall be transferred via deed. Next section, if you're financing it as real estate, you're transferring it, it shall be treated, you know, it has to be treated via deed. Section C and D then talks about what type of deed, whether it's a warranty deed or a quitclaim deed. And then it provides a form of what that deed can look like. Okay. What the proposal here to strike is the deed, it's striking that is substantially in the form provided in this subsection. And they're adding in here at the bottom, a warranty deed described may take the following form. There is a legal consequence of these two pieces that you need to be aware of. How the statute is written, it says, if you're transferring it via a warranty deed, that is substantially in this form, then it has these legal consequences when it's duly executed and delivered. Line 6, right there. Substantially in this form, when it's duly executed and delivered, it has the force and effect of a deed in fee simple. And the key thing is then going to be that the individual selling it warrants and defends the same to the grantee and their heirs. So it's saying if you're transferring it via deed and you do it in this form, it has this legal effect. By striking that language at the top, you're saying that the deed doesn't need to be in that form. What form does it need to be in? The statute doesn't say.
So it could be like,
My understanding, I don't know if there's any other statutory section that would control, not to my knowledge, but if you wrote on a piece of paper that, you know, you're conveying a deed to somebody and you're duly executing it and you signed it, you know, in accordance with any legal requirements there, that would suffice. there's a lot of information that's in this form. I mean, it talks about where it's located. It has to have a description, name here on line 6, name of the manufacturer, the model, the serial number, encumbrances, exceptions, where the thing is going, the book and the page number and the land records where it exists. So there's a lot of information there. And the proposal here is to not require that it be in substantially the form. If you're asking why, my understanding is there was testimony from certain financing lenders that said nobody follows it. So we shouldn't make people follow it. My response to the committee and to you all is it doesn't mandate that it be followed. It just says substantially this form. So it could be in a slightly different form, but it would need to be in substantially that form.
So
So
contain that information.
correct. So just a thing for you all to be aware of. One other thing I will mention here is there was striking this language about whether or not you need to get the landowner's authorization.
Before we get to that, I think we have a question from Representative Maslin, and then I have a question.
Thank you.
My apologies.
Um, Can you shed some insight in why the committee wanted to go in this direction? And can I add it seems to me we would be going, if we pass this out, going from something that's pretty straightforward and neat and clean to something that's potentially nebulous. And why would they want to do that?
I'm not going to ask Cam to speak for the committee. I don't think that's a fair position to put him in, but I encourage you to go ask someone on the committee.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
So my question is, are you aware if someone transfers that property via sort of a note, like a informal note, and that doesn't contain that information, what would happen for like grand listings and lister cards and stuff like that?
I don't know the answer off the top of my head, but if you want to think about it, and come back. Okay.
Yeah, Representative Resident.
What is I don't know if this is an obvious question or not. What is the difference between a warranty deed and a quitclaim deed?
Yep. So the warranty deed is where the individual who is selling that property is guaranteeing clear title of that property, and they will defend the purchaser of the property against any claims against that. And the warranty deed is the opposite. You are transferring the ownership that you have, and you're not defending against anyone who has a claim of ownership over you. Okay, so in this, just trying to, I guess, kind of, very briefly summarize. In the sections authorizing the sale of these things via a bill of sale, regardless of whether it has been financed or transferred via deed previously. And then changing the requirement that the deed that conveys the property be in substantially the form that's out in statute. The last piece I will mention here, as I said, is currently, if you're purchasing the home and it is on someone else's property, you need to get that landowner's permission, or the statute indicates that you need it. Here in the struck language here, it says no owner of land on which the mobile home is sited shall unreasonably withhold the consent. And then when you get to the deed section itself, it has a section where the owner of the tract of land signs. And so that was struck. And the discussion was that they didn't feel that it was necessary to get the landowner's permission. Okay.
I'd love us to think about that scenario.
So I did flag for the committee that
Is
you,
that just private landowners, or could it be a landowner, like a park owner? Or is a park owner a landowner?
yes, it could be, so the scenarios that I gave are, it could be a mobile home park. So you own the mobile home park. You don't own the mobile homes themselves, you may, but somebody owns the mobile home and they're just paying you the rent to be in the lot rent. And they would not be required to get your permission to come on and then sell and move that home. And I brought up, it could be a park in that situation, or it just could be somebody's property. I mean, I could have multiple acres where, I have my home on one part of the land and a mobile home on a separate part that have, allowed somebody to put there. And that could be a scenario as well.
It'd be reasonable for a lender to require a lease agreement to be executed in part of the package.
Well, especially if you're moving it from one park to another.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so the C and the D are just the different deeds and the different forms. The amendments there are the same. I
Sorry,
walk,
can you back up?
yes, ma'am. Go up to,
There's like a gendered wife husband
Yes, there
language.
is, yeah.
What's that about?
there is in the form itself,
Is that like a drafting convention that we do that? Or is there a new drafting convention that's a little?
that is in current statute. And you could change it to be more neutral language.
Sure. Are there drafting conventions around that at all?
Typically, there are, yes.
What are they?
As a general matter, we would go to a more neutral reference.
I'm gonna withhold all of my other amendment desires except for that one, which I think, like, I'm just gonna say that we would like to do that, please.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
So,
Chair.
Thank you. Yes.
I will not,
The others can wait for like actually more formal.
I will, take some ownership in that, initially, the form was going to be struck.
Ah.
And so it was all just strike through. And then at the end, I commented to the committee that they may want to provide a form, whether you're going to substantially require people follow it or not. It's probably a good policy to have some indication to the public of what it could look like. So it became unstruck at the last minute and did not get a further amendment from there. Okay, so that's the end of that section. I'm on page 7 now, moving into the next section where the proposal is to strike this entire section 2605, and the section is listed as mobile home bill of sale conversion process. So as I mentioned, some of these homes don't have a deed. They may have been purchased via a bill of sale many years ago, and the individual has lived in it, and there's never been any need or reason to convert it over to a deed. Well, now, if you remember in the previous section, it says that if you're going to sell it and transfer it to somebody who's going to finance it as real estate, then you have to transfer it via a deed. So this section is how an individual takes the bill of sale and goes and converts it to a deed with the clerk's office in the town where the mobile home is located. The proposal was to strike this entire section somewhat in alignment with the above because there's an authorization to transfer them via bill of sale or deed. I did comment to the committee that you're removing the statutory authority where you convert a bill of sale to a deed, which somebody may want to do.
For their, like, for whatever reason they would have.
For whatever reason the committee has, and I will defer to the committee.
And we're wondering, like, the reasons that a person who maybe even before this passed had a bill of sale, they might want to convert it to a deed. Can you imagine a scenario where that might be true?
Well, the immediate scenario was the requirement that you had to if you were selling it to somebody or you're refinancing it as real estate. Maybe you purchased it at a time and you could only purchase it as a personal property loan, but you've paid it off and now at some point you want to go get, some sort of loan taken out and using your house as, the collateral. Could you do it as a real estate transaction? You would need to have a deed and you could convert it to do that.
So it's also the example that if a person purchased it on a mobile home lot, it would be a bill of sale, but then citing it, it would then be eligible to be a warranty deed.
It would be eligible to be financed as real estate at that point, yes. And I don't know at what point the lender is going to gather that information. I mean, you're buying it from a dealer. Presumably, you know where it's going. And whether it's then going to be permanently cited there. So I don't know if a finance lender is going to say, I'll give you a personal property loan, and then when you cite it, we'll convert it to a real estate agreement, or if they would make that determination on the outset. I don't know the answer to, but
Typically,
I mean, maybe you've already said this, came in late, but, currently you have to present a uniform bill of sale before you can move that off its site.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So would now that have to, it could include either a deed or a bill of sale?
So there's a section of, great point, sir. There's a section that's not in the bill where if you're transferring ownership via bill of sale, you have to go through a lot of steps when you're doing that. You have to go to the clerk where the location of the house, where the location of the mobile home is. You have to get sign off from the clerk's office that you don't owe any taxes on that home. You would then have to take it to the clerk if you're moving it into another town. Then you would have to file the bill of sale there. So there's a lot of steps in what you go through if you're transferring it via a bill of sale, and none of that was changed. So if you are transferring it via bill of sale, you would still have to comply with all of those requirements. What this is doing is it's primarily just, it's removing requirements that if you're transferring it and it's being financed as real estate, it's not required to be transferred via deed anymore. That's really, that I would say, one of the primary changes here. Okay, so there could be reasons you would want to convert it. And I think in statutorily, the primary reasons would be you're financing it as real estate or someone's buying it from you financed as real estate, in which case it has to be transferred via a deed. And so if you only have a bill of sale, this would be the process you would go through to convert it to a deed.
So on the bottom of page 6, Cam, you have the section of allowing a property to be sold as a bill of sale, or sold with a bill of sale. But then in this section, this is removing the statutory authority to convert back to. So does that create somewhat of a legislative trap?
Potentially,
I
and
could use a less strong word than trap, but.
I can see it as a possible issue. The statute and the changes that are made here don't change the fact that there are these homes that exist that don't have deeds because they weren't financed that way.
Mhm.
And I did mention to the committee that by striking this section, you are removing the ability to convert that to a deed. And, whether if this were to go into effect as it's drafted, you can still transfer them via deed. And so there may be a reason you still need to convert it. And, whether a finance lender would accept one versus the other, require a deed, moving forward, allow someone to transfer via bill of sale if they're financing via real estate. I'd have to defer those questions to those entities that are operating in this space.
That was actually
Oh,
my
okay.
question about whether this is something we might want to consider addressing.
Okay. I am on page 8. Now we're going to move into a different area of the law. Different concepts. We're going to talk about limited equity cooperatives. And I'll start by just giving a very kind of brief overview for those who may not be aware. In Title 11, which deals with corporations, there are cooperative housing corporations that can be organized and registered with the Secretary of State. And those are organizations that own property, and individual members have a membership share in that cooperative, and that membership share gives them a proprietary lease, which is the right to live in a portion of that property. And I'm trying to be careful here because these could be apartment buildings. They could be a mobile home park. I mean, there's many different types of homes that a corporate housing corporation or a cooperative housing corporation could own. And you would have a proprietary lease to live in whatever that arrangement is. One of the apartments in an apartment building, one of the rooms in a house, a mobile home on a mobile home park. And so within the cooperative housing corporation chapter, There is what's called a limited equity cooperative, so a subset of these. And as you can see in the sub A here, the purpose of a limited equity cooperative on line 15 is to fulfill the public purpose of providing and preserving housing for persons and households of low and moderate income at the time they purchase their membership. So the design here is this is going to try to be available to people of low and moderate income. Those terms are defined. I believe low is 80% AMI, and I think moderate is 100 and 120. I'll check while we're sitting here talking. So within that, this section, if you're going to be a limited equity cooperative, there are certain additional restrictions that apply. And one of those is you have to have this value formula that, so it's sub 1 here, the articles of incorporation shall require that the cooperative interest be sold at not more than a transfer value determined by a limited equity formula contained in the articles. And again, that formula is designed to provide and maintain long-term affordability to people of low and moderate income. So the point here is you don't want the membership shares to be, extremely high. You're trying to get, make this affordable for people. The other key piece that so I'm kind of skipping, a lot of the section here because I want to bring you down to the sub 6, which is the other important piece to be aware of. The Articles of Incorporation require that upon dissolution of the Cooperative Housing Corporation, any assets remaining after retirement of corporate debts and distribution to members of their share shall be distributed to a charitable organization described as Section 501c3 of the IRS or another limited equity cooperative. So if you're registered as a limited equity cooperative, if you dissolve, which requires a vote of the members, then when you dissolve, after you pay off whatever debts you have as the cooperative organization, you pay the individuals their membership share, which, as I mentioned in number 1, is intended to be an amount that makes it accessible for people of low and moderate income. Anything that remains must go to a nonprofit or another limited equity cooperative. That's going to be important in a separate section of the bill. The last piece here is the sub 7 and then the new sub 8. So this is in sub 7 beginning on line 6 here. The Articles of Incorporation require that no sublease of a unit shall provide for monthly payments by the subleasee in excess of 110% of monthly payments for the unit provided in the proprietary lease. What does that mean? Again, it's intended to a cooperative housing organization is an intended cooperative structure where the members live in the housing itself. So there's separate requirements that say that 80% of the units of a cooperative housing organization have to be lived in by members of that organization. And there's a separate section that says if you sublease a unit, you can only sublease it for 1 year at a time. So you've already put some kind of limitations on how many people can sublease and for how long. And what this is saying is for the limited equity cooperatives, we're going to further restrict your ability to sublease because we want it to be available for low and moderate income people. We're going to say that you can only sublease the unit for 110% of your proprietary lease costs. Whatever your membership cost is to live in this cooperative organization, you can only charge 10% above that if you're going to sublease the unit. The issue becomes, and was talked about in committee, for certain mobile home parks that are limited equity cooperatives. If the individual owns the mobile home on the park, they may have a mortgage. And if they need to lease that unit out, they can only lease it for 110% of their membership costs, which in some instances is only a few $100s for the lot rent. So if you have to lease it, you can only lease it for 10% above that, which wouldn't be enough to cover things like your mortgage, your utilities, or upkeep, etc. That was the issue that was raised that they were trying to address. And so what they did was they added this sub 8, which says that for a mobile home park organized as a limited equity cooperative, the Articles of Incorporation shall prohibit the subleasing of a unit unless a member demonstrates a hardship, in which case the board of directors may, by an affirmative vote, grant an exemption. That's not defined, so it would be up to the cooperative itself to determine what a hardship would be. And then it says that the unit has to be subleased to an individual of low or moderate income. As I mentioned, those are defined terms. And then lastly, it says that it would require that the unit owner shall not sublease a unit for a higher amount than necessary to cover costs of the unit, which include the monthly payment, the proprietary lease that you're paying. Moving to the top of page 11, the mortgage, utilities, etc.
And this section feels to me to be like one of the sections that's further from tax policy.
Okay.
You could say that someone's ability to pay their property taxes would be sort of wrapped up in this. That's the only reason I would. But that's a stretch. Yeah.
Kim, do you know, so whether it's a deed or a bill of sale? It sounds like from what you were talking about, there could be a financing different from banks regarding that.
Yes, sir.
Is that, has that been considered and discussed in committee as far as maybe even Christelia? Because I would think regardless, it would still be financed as a bill.
I will say I was there when Mr. Delia testified, and he was asking that the flexibility to finance it as either real estate or personal property remain. That was one of his primary concerns. There was discussion at one point of whether to mandate that all of them be financed as real estate, to take away that, option to finance it as personal property. And he testified that there was concern among his membership about if that were the case, they would just kind of pull back from financing mobile homes entirely. So he wanted that flexibility to remain, and the committee left that alone. They left it such that there's a little bit of flexibility there.
Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to try to speed up a little bit. This last subsection B here is stating that, so we're still in a limited equity cooperative chapter, states that a mobile home park organized as a limited equity cooperative shall be treated for the purposes of state funding and grants as if it were incorporated as a state nonprofit for a public purpose and public benefit under the laws of this state. Nothing in this section shall be deemed to alter or change specific funding or grant requirements, including the definition of low or moderate income as outlined in any program, funding, or grant source. The problem that the committee was trying to address here is these are corporations, corporate entities. They have to register with the Secretary of State's office. Some of them with the Secretary of State's office are listed as nonprofit organizations, and some are not. And as they were digging into that, the Secretary of State's office indicated that at some point in the past, these entities were being treated as if they were nonprofits. They're not, by nature of the fact that it's a limited equity cooperative doesn't automatically make it a nonprofit. And when you actually look at the cross references in the statutory section and the organization structure itself, it's somewhat aligned in a for-profit status, not a nonprofit status. And so there are some that are listed as nonprofit, some that are. The new Secretary of State's registration system lists them properly, which is just a, business organization, cooperative housing organization, limited equity cooperative, and doesn't make a claim as to whether it is nonprofit or for-profit. Because of that, the testimony in the committee and the problem was it is difficult for some of these entities to access certain state funding and grant sources because it may be difficult for them to demonstrate their nonprofit status. And so they wanted this language in here to try to signal to state funds and state grants that these entities are similar to nonprofits. They serve a public purpose and a public benefit, and they should be treated as such. Didn't want that to be interpreted to somehow alter any of the specific eligibility criteria for any state funding and grant. And their point, and I see we have a question about the point they were kind of referencing back to is this provision in subsection 6, which limits what any equity, money equity that a limited equity cooperative has when it dissolves, the limitation on its use from there.
I think there's an existing question about if this applies to property taxes and income taxes. That needs to be resolved.
That was one of my questions.
Okay.
And my-
Sorry to steal your thunder.
But no, that's great, because then give me a chance for a second question, which is, who is not included in this? I mean, we're using the term mobile home park. What about a permanently affordable village created using modular housing? Would that constitute the same thing?
It is a great point of highlighting that the limitation here is for a mobile home park organized as a limited equity cooperative. So the sub B doesn't even apply to all limited equity cooperatives, which have the same condition. The sub 6 applies to a limited equity cooperative, whether it's a mobile home park or not. The sub B here would only apply to a mobile home park that's a limited equity cooperative. So unless the village you're referring to is registered as a limited equity cooperative, then it would not apply.
But if it was registered as limited equity cooperative, but it wasn't a mobile home park,
Then it would not apply. No, ma'am.
which seems, going back to your point, if what we're trying to do is build consistency, it seems like that's another potential need for modification.
Okay. Moving into the next section, this is the bottom of page 11. This is a little bit outside my area. This is more municipal zoning and is an area covered by Ellen in our office. But I will just, comment what's here on the page. This is trying to clarify that for municipal zoning purposes, the bylaws cannot exclude, so I'm on lines 18 and 19. The bylaws cannot exclude mobile homes, modular homes, or prefabricated housing. Currently, it just says from the municipality, and this is just clarifying that the bylaws cannot exclude those types of housing from districts that allow year-round residential development. And if you have any specific questions about the impact of that, I would potentially defer that to Ellen. Okay, so now we're moving into
A section that's outside of our jurisdiction.
Understood. We're going to move into areas that are covered by my colleague here, but I'm going to scroll down because I just want to bring up one other section that is in my area, which is here on the bottom of page 18. There's some session law here that talks about the Secretary of State's business registration, and it just authorizes the Secretary of State upon a request from a limited equity cooperative to update the limited equity cooperative's registration to ensure proper reflection of the cooperative's business organization structure within the Secretary of State's system. As I mentioned earlier, there are some that are listed as nonprofits. There's a question about whether or not they actually are nonprofits. And so, as opposed to unilaterally making them all nonprofits or unilaterally going in the opposite direction, the Secretary of State's office was okay with this language of saying, if the entity so chooses, we will update their registration within our system to accurately reflect what it should be. And then the last thing is what I mentioned towards the beginning, authority for our office to make revisions to the Vermont statutes to replace mobile home with manufactured home where it's appropriate.
Is that how that's always phrased?
Manufactured home?
No, like when you
Oh.
do a find and replace formally, when you do a formal find and replace, is that how you
Yes.
usually phrase it?
Yes, this is the template language that we use. Yeah. And then effective July 1 of 2026. And If you would like, Madam Chair, I'm happy to turn it over to my colleague to walk through the remaining sections of the bill.
That sounds great. I'm gonna make a brief public service announcement that we are moving H 750 to some other time this week so that we can finish walking through this bill. So anyone here who's here for school stuff, we won't be able to leave. Dawn's here for both things, so if you just expect.
Oh, my.
You're pretty stable.
I'm also gonna make a public, service announcement that we're probably gonna be here Friday afternoon. But I don't have any, we don't have it scheduled yet.
And Madam Chair, I apologize, but I am scheduled elsewhere. So I will follow up.
Thank you.
You're welcome, my pleasure.
Afternoon. I don't know if I saw you this morning, but I am still John Gray. I'm the legislative counsel. Before I screen share, because I'm going to pull up what you were just looking at with Cameron, I think it's actually simpler for me just to explain what's in my sections because the concept is incredibly simple, but the language is not. So I think Cameron did a really good job of setting up that sometimes manufactured homes are treated differently, right? Sometimes they're mobile, sometimes they're affixed to the land, sometimes they're financed as tangible personal property, and sometimes they're financed as real estate, in which case you get a mortgage. One of the consequences that follows from this is what kind of taxation do you get for a manufactured home depending on its treatment? So if it's real property, it's subjected to the property transfer tax. But if it's been financed as tangible personal property, it's movable, you just bought it from the lot, it's not affixed to land. It may then be subjected to sales and use tax rather than the property transfer tax, which only applies to real property. So the sections that you're going to see me walk through are just treating all manufactured homes the same for this point of sale tax, regardless of the financing structure. And so what it does is it exempts from the sales and use tax mobile homes that are treated as tangible personal property and subjects them, just like manufactured homes that are treated as real property, to the property transfer tax. The end result is all manufactured homes under that definition in Title 10 would be subjected to the property transfer tax, and none would be subjected to the sales and use tax. That is the simple explanation of what is happening in these sections. The reason I'm going to have a lot of text for you is because we don't typically subject tangible personal property to a real property tax, which means that all the defined terms we have in that chapter, the property transfer tax, may not speak to the terms that we use when we talk about tangible personal property. So lots of conforming changes have to be made to subject manufactured homes that are tangible personal property to a real property tax.
And so I think there's the policy consistency question that I want us to focus on here. And then there's a secondary question of we're moving something. We're talking about ed fund revenue, and we're talking about housing. What's the housing fund called?
The housing conservation. Yeah.
Yes. So we're talking about different pots of money coming in as well.
Okay. Here we go. So I am on page 12. And we're first starting out with the sales and use tax exemption. And for our exemptions, we set out statutory purposes. So what you can see here in non-underlined language, beginning on line 9. So we've stated the statutory purpose for the existing exemption for certain kinds of mobile homes and modular housing. This is not what Cameron has been talking about. This reference to mobile homes and modular housing is using a Title IX definition that is different than the Title 10 definition of manufactured homes that Cameron talked to you guys about. If you'd like to see it, you've technically seen it at the beginning of this bill, but I will just flip to it real quick. This Title IX definition of mobile homes picks up both the classic definition of mobile home in Title 10 that Cameron walked you through, and also picks up this other category, unmotorized vehicle other than travel or recreational trailer, designed to be towed and designed or equipped for use as sleeping, eating, or living quarters. Whatever that may be, that is still subjected to the sales and use tax under this chapter. However, there is an exemption provided for those mobile homes and modular housing under that definition.
Yes, so like a camper.
Yeah, I think that's-
That's like the intention.
I think
Like
that's the right-
Campers under.
Exactly.
Oversimplification, but that's the.
I think that's the easy way to think about it. The new language that we have here, beginning on line 13, is the exemption I was just talking about. So the statutory purpose of the exemption for sales of mobile homes is to ensure that all sales of mobile homes, as defined in Title 10, that classic definition of mobile homes, are treated similarly for purposes of the property transfer tax. So treat all Title 10 defined mobile homes the same way for purposes of property transfer tax. So to ensure that they aren't double hit, that they don't both get a sales tax, also a property transfer tax, we are in section 6, creating an exemption. So that's on page 13, leading into page 13. Retail sales and use of the following shall be exempt from the tax on retail sales and the use tax. You can see the existing 40% exemption that's not being touched. It's just updating the reference. That's for those campers types. So those are exempted, 40% of those receipts. But the new exemption is your subdivision B here on line 5. Sales of mobile homes as defined in Title 10, when sold as tangible personal property, would now be exempt from sales and use tax. The next sections are just subjecting those same set of mobile homes to the property transfer tax. And it's exactly as I described before. I have to create a bunch of conforming changes to ensure that the definitions that typically apply to real property pick up tangible personal property. You can think about if we're transferring by deed, it's not the sort of thing that would apply to tangible personal property. So we're adding terms to make clear that the commonly used terms in this chapter will capture this tangible personal property. That's what you see on line 16 and 17. In the case of a mobile home sold to tangible personal property, transfer includes a sale. And it's a lot of changes along this line.
But we wanted to simplify this considerably. What would a path to that be?
So if nothing was transferred by bill of sale, but was instead done by deed, as in all manufactured homes were treated uniformly as real property rather than tangible personal property, you would need to make none of the changes in any of the sections that I have. They would all go away. Should be great for me. I would.
This isn't about.
Because then all manufactured homes would be subjected to the property transfer tax because they would be real property.
The question becomes, which we have to discuss, is when is it advantageous for buyer, seller, or lender to treat it as tangible property instead of real property?
And that's exactly the questions that House General was asking and trying to reach the place that it did.
There'd be a problem separating campers.
So those would still be, we have a call out for those because we can reference the Title IX definition. So I might need to make one tweak to that section, that's possible. But yes, they would still be subjected to there's a way to treat those under sales and use, maintain those for sales and use, and then treat all others uniformly for the property transfer tax.
Sorry.
So, under the property transfer tax for mobile homes, they could still be looked at as a seasonal home, in other words.
Yeah.
The higher property transfer tax rate.
Yep. I think that makes sense. Yep.
Right.
And we would have to look at if we started going down that path, I'd have to look at you'll recall that the way the property transfer tax is set up is you have that 1.25%, but then you have a list of exclusions and different treatments based on certain values. So we could look at those if we started going down. Other similar type changes, value, the existing definition of value references transfer of title to property, speaks to gifts, controlling interest. We just need to make sure that we picture up sales of tangible personal property. So that's what you see on lines 8 to 11. In the case of a mobile home sold as tangible personal property, value would be the amount of the full actual consideration of such sale paid or to be paid, including the amount of any liens existing before the sale and not removed thereby. Capturing the same concepts as apply to one that are sold with a deed, but just referencing sale as opposed to transfer by title. Going to be boring changes throughout these sections.
Thanks for the, I mean, I'll try to be quick here. Could something be transferred via a bill of sale and then sort of immediately converted to a deed for the purposes of taxation?
Yes, I think that is the way.
Like if I bought a house in New Hampshire and then brought it to Vermont and converted it to a deed, then everything could sort of proceed from there? How would that work?
That's a good question because I assume you would be trying to pick up the use tax, but you would now be exempted from the use tax under this proposal.
Yeah, because people really track their use tax. Sorry.
I know nothing about the real world. I just know what is.
All one Vermont.
I think you would have to figure out how, yeah, I don't know the answer to how you deal with.
I'm trying to think through the scenario. I mean, clearly just having deeds would like create consistency under the law in a way that would make everything else work. But I'm thinking about sort of the scenario where you're working with a seller that just like doesn't want to deal with such things. Ways to sort of still have it work out. Okay,
Yeah, I mean, if they have,
we don't have to figure it out right now.
most obvious change in this chapter, property under the existing law means real property, but now you're adding tangible personal property. So in the case of a mobile home sold in that way, it would include that tangible personal property. Term does not include personal properties transferred with real property other than a mobile home. So it would be picked up in this way. We've got the call out to the Title 10 definition of mobile home. Again, not that Title 9 more expansive definition. And then page 15, this is the actual imposition of the property transfer tax. Tax is hereby imposed upon the transfer by deed of title to property located in the state, transfer or acquisition of a controlling interest in any personal title to property in the state, and the new language, or the sale of a mobile home as tangible personal property in the state, which would speak to the hypothetical we were just given. Section 9, more conforming changes. Taxes paid to the commissioner within 30 days after transfer of title to property typically. That's how we're typically dealing with real property. In the case of a transfer or acquisition of controlling interest, for which a deed is not given within 30 days after transfer or acquisition. And then the concept you would have for these kinds of mobile homes, or in the case of a sale of a mobile home as tangible personal property within 30 days after that sale. So this is giving the timing when that tax liability. Section 10 is how to deal with property transfer returns. They're getting into some mechanical pieces. You can see what's done for under the existing law and for existing real property. In the case of a property transfer by deed, a property transfer return complying with this section is delivered to the town clerk at the time a deed evidencing a transfer of title is delivered to that clerk for recording. In the case of that transfer by a controlling interest for which a deed is not given, a property transfer return is delivered to the commissioner within 30 days after that transfer acquisition. And then the mechanical proposal for dealing with this is that in the case of a sale of a mobile home as tangible personal property, property transfer return complying with the section shall be delivered to a town clerk at the same time that an executed mobile home uniform bill of sale is filed with the clerk. So if you have that bill of sale, you'll be providing the property transfer return at that time. Some cleanup changes in this conforming style. And then spelling out for subsection E, what are the confidentiality provisions? In the case of a transfer acquisition of a controlling interest in a personal title property for which deed is not given, that's under existing law, the return submitted to the commissioner is treated as a tax return and dealt with under the standard confidentiality provisions of section 3102. This is treating the sales of mobile homes as tangible personal property in the same way. You can see above that this is done differently for real property, right? In the case of a property transferred by deed, Commissioner is authorized to disclose to any person any information appearing on that return, including statistical information, such information derived from research into information appearing on the returns as is necessary to determine.
I,
if-
sorry.
I don't think that there's any, I don't think this is a deliberate, thought through.
I didn't mean to ask you why, anyway, so thanks for answering that.
Lastly, acknowledgement, I think that's the last one, acknowledgement of return and tax payment. On receipt by a town clerk, the clerk shall forthwith mail or otherwise deliver to the transferee of title to property for the purchaser. You just need to pick up that purchaser. A mobile home is tangible personal property. A written acknowledgement of the receipt of that return and certificate. That acknowledgement shall be affixed to the deed for real property. For that controlling interest, it would be affixed to the document evidencing the transfer or acquisition of a direct or indirect controlling interest. And for this set of purchasers, it would be affixed to the mobile home uniform bill of sale. The acknowledgement affixed to that bill of sale shall not disclose the amount of tax paid with respect to any return or transfer. So treating in the same way that these other sets of real property are dealt, but picking up the bill of sale as opposed to a deed. I do have one more piece here. This is a report from the Department of Tax. This is on page 18. This is going back to the concept that Cameron was speaking to you about, those mobile home parks that are organized as limited equity cooperatives. There was testimony heard in House General about some broad variation, I think, in the ways that mobile home parks organized in this particular way are valued. So there's just a question as to how to approach that. So this section 12 speaks to it on line 4. On or before November 15th of this year, Department of Taxes shall submit a written report to the House Committees on General Housing and on Ways and Means, and the Senate Committees on Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs, and on Finance with an inventory and analysis of the current appraised value of each mobile home park registered as a limited equity cooperative, and would include these 3 factors: a description of the different appraisal methods used across the state, examination of any justifications for differences in approach, so that there are differences, and recommendations for ensuring consistent and appropriate appraisal, taking into consideration the limitations under this call out. And just to remind you of the call out, this is the piece that Cameron was speaking to you about on those transfers of interest, the proprietary leases and the like, that upon dissolution of a limited equity cooperative, the assets would be applied against the debts and then could only be transferred, say, to nonprofits or charitable organizations and the like. And so this was from their position. The way that House General was framing this was, is fair market value an accurate way to think about the appraised value of these particular parks? And should this particular section affect the way that?
So it's about appraisal, not tax. I have not read this section carefully yet. It's about appraisal and not tax treatment.
Yes.
I think when I'd heard about it sort of just around the building, I thought it was tax treatment. Okay.
It may at one point have been,
Okay.
and then changed in the final, in the earlier stages of this bill, there was a wholesale exemption for the mobile home limited equity cooperatives from the property tax outright. And there might have been a question about, should you change the treatment of these? But it ended up becoming about or permissible variations.
So was the, per Representative Holcomb's earlier point, we're talking about just mobile homes that are in an LEC. So is the problem they were trying to solve, or was the testimony, and if this special committee just on that, that mobile homes generally, that there's not much of an issue with how those are appraised writ large, but when it comes to specifically LECs, that's where they're seeing the.
It's more
Right.
specific than that. So
Okay.
this is about the appraised value of the park itself, rather than the mobile
Okay.
home.
Oh, okay.
And so, but you can think about it this way. You can imagine 2 poles. Imagine a mobile home park organized as a limited equity cooperative, which owns the entirety of the land within its structure. You would imagine that the appraised value should reflect the land values of that, but it might be, and under some of the sections of statute, it might be that they divvy up those interests among the mobile home owners to pay their share essentially of that common interest that they share in. But you can imagine another mobile home park that only owns the communal section and all of the land is otherwise owned by the mobile home owners themselves, in which case you get a different appraised value.
I think there's a question of appraisal value, and then there's a question of like how parcels are counted, how parcels are combined, and
Yes.
then how it's valued.
And again, I totally defer to people who know far more about this than I do, but I think this also applies to limited equity cooperatives that have manufactured or modular housing. I mean, there is a shift in how we're building, but it also could include a shared septic system, for example, or a shared water system.
I think it also applies to all manufactured home communities or trailer parks, or however we want to describe them, regardless of what their actual ownership structure is. I think there's.
I
Yeah.
totally agree. I think we're saying the same thing. I just need to look at whether this is too narrow. It's my question.
Yeah, and I also think there's a question of, are we actually approaching this this is very, very narrow, and everything we're doing on regional assessment districts actually to some degree gets at all of this without naming it. And so, and we might, yes, but we will have time on all of that.
The other thing I might offer on this front, I think this is a comment that was made yesterday, that a lot of times there's variations in practice, right? That aren't attributable to the way that the law is set up. So there may be variation that's happening, and we look out and say, oh, there's this variation. What explains it? We need to change the law, but it doesn't actually address the way that people actually appraise, which is, I think, the broader work that you guys are undertaking. So just to say that variation is not always explainable through the way that the law is working, and sometimes tweaking the law does not address the variation.
Thank you.
That's it for me.
Thanks, Sean.
Well, thank you.
We're likely to like change lots of stuff here, so I don't. I'm happy to have you come and give us sort of a sense of scale of what we're talking about, if that's helpful, and then we're gonna spend some real time with Abby, who I think has lots of thoughts for us. And we're not gonna be talking about the school construction at all this afternoon. We're moving it to Friday, I'm sorry. No, everything we do is interesting.
I like numbers,
Cool, great.
Features on-
So glad you're here.
Numbers.
Okay, cool, great. Floor is yours.
All right, Deb Barnett, Joint Fiscal Office. In that case, I don't know if I necessarily need to share my screen unless you want me to.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I will do that. There
I think
is.
just getting a sense of the scale that we're talking about would be helpful.
Yep.
Not like a blow by blow.
Yep, absolutely. I have to find which of my like 12 tabs I have open is the correct one. Okay. Here we go. Like there.
How many windows though, with tabs?
Good question. Yeah, I can go all the way down. Okay. So broadly in terms of scale, by exempting manufactured home transactions, the manufactured homes that are transferred as tangible personal property from the sales tax, we're looking at an estimate of about $600,000 in foregone tax revenue. This is built on an estimate in the tax expenditure report on that slightly more expansive definition of manufactured homes and campers in Title IX, but that's the general sense. That's ed fund revenue. And there's a disclaimer Julia always has me put on changes impacting the education fund, right? Absent any other changes in policy, the property yield or homestead property tax rate need to be adjusted to account for the foregone revenue from this exemption. So $600,000 in fiscal year 27, and then about $650,000 annually afterwards, accounting for inflation as time goes on. On the property transfer tax side, by subjecting those transactions that were previously subject to the sales tax to the property transfer tax, you're looking at about $100,000 in additional property transfer tax revenue. And I will note that the vast majority of transfers of manufactured homes in the property transfer tax data, which I appreciate the call out of you all were wondering why it's in statute that there should be a lot of data about the property transfer tax. I love having that information. That's really helpful to me. And so the vast majority of those transactions are occurring for principal residences. And what that means is that in the value under $200,000, it's subject to the 0.5% property transfer tax rate. for principal residences. So the rate is lower than our sales tax rate, and that's why you're seeing lower value in the property transfer tax when you subject those same transactions there. I will also note, though, to Representative Higley's question, there is a very small amount that's paying that 3.4% rate that's levied on second homes fit for year-round habitation, but it's a really small, it's just a couple. So yes, you're broadly looking at an effective tax rate on mobile manufactured home transactions of about 0.7%. So the vast majority is following in this category of the value is under $200,000. It's a principal residence. Yes, and I don't, given that you're just looking for magnitude, I don't necessarily need to go into allocations and how the property transfer tax
That's
works.
helpful, thank you. The one question I think I have that I don't think you would have an answer to, but maybe you do, is the sales tax revenue. If a lot of purchasing of manufactured homes are happening in just a few places because that's where the lots are or the dealers are, and that community happens to have a local option tax, we could make a change that would have a really outsized impact for like one town, and even though it would be a negligible impact for the state as a whole. So that might be a fun thing to think about.
Sure. Yeah, I'd have to see. Yes. Yeah, I don't have an answer right now. And I know there's a lot of, right, like that question depends. I understand there's a lot of towns considering a local option this year.
And then if it's being delivered, or you're paying it
Correct.
to your town, not to where you've bought it. And anyway, lots of questions there.
Sure.
Okay, thanks.
I may have been under a misperception or misconception, not sure which it was. But that was that many homes that are sold as tangible property pay the sales tax. But then when they are cited, they can then convert that into a warranty deed and then into a property transfer tax and get a credit back from the sales tax.
Oh, wow.
Do your numbers reflect that whole process?
We are relying on information on the number of manufactured homes that are delivered in Vermont for the sales tax portion. And so saying of those deliveries, right, if you were to convert that from the sales tax to the property transfer tax, that's the magnitude. It's probably, to your point, stating the maximum potential impact, and given the type of transactions where folks are converting and getting a refund on the sales tax, the impact would be lower than.
So not
Numbers presented there.
actual data, but estimates of data by the number coming in.
The best data we have available on the subject. Yep.
Thanks.
Yep.
Question, what happens when Canfield gets its new factory online?
Always can.
But again, if they're being delivered, then I believe that it's the place where the sales tax gets.
He's supporting.
But I think he's still paying it.
So, yeah, my federal tax credits close it anyway, so it's.
Hi, Abby.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here.
I'm Shepherd, Executive Policy Advisor at the Department of Taxes, and I do have many thoughts on the bill. Thank you for summarizing my testimony in advance. There's a lot going on in the bill. You've heard a lot of the main points that I was actually planning to make. And then I have a few others that I would be happy to point out. So when we first started really digging into this bill, just trying to understand what the overall intent was not really clear. So I tried to hypothesize a few and then had comments on that. And then I have very specific points about the sections that I can go over. So first, one potential intent that seems to be somewhat clear in the bill is lowering the actual effective tax rate on these transfers of mobile homes. So by shifting to the property transfer tax, like Ted just went over, it would lower to, it was interesting to hear you say 0.7%, I think, as opposed to under current statute with the sales tax 40% exemption, it's more like a 3.4%. I'm looking at Ted for the numbers, effective tax rate instead of 6%. So that's an interesting kind of policy decision if you were interested in making that shift. So that does have that certainly is like a clear policy direction in the bill. That said, we would caution, be careful making such a huge change to tax treatment, which typically follows property law. So divorcing actual property law treatment of different types of property from the way they're taxed is a little unusual. So under property transfer tax law, you have controlling interests are really the only type of non-deeded transfer that is subject to that tax. So this would be pretty unusual. It also would not, in our minds, be a simplification for the mobile home buyers. Real estate transactions are pretty complex processes, and they would have to go through the property transfer tax return, as opposed to when buying and paying sales tax, that's entirely managed by the seller. So that's much simpler. That's just a very small sort of administrative reason, but it certainly wouldn't simplify for those mobile home buyers.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Did you submit your testimony?
These are just my notes. Would you
Thank
like me to?
so much.
Absolutely, sure. It's changed as I was listening to, it's really helpful to hear Cameron talk about the bill and Ted and just, light
I
bulb
just,
moments.
knowing that you'll submit it means that my notes will be different while you're talking.
Okay,
And
absolutely.
I'll be able to listen better. Thank you.
Good.
Anyway, another potential intent through the bill is perhaps to allow more mobile homes to take advantage of that very recent, I think it was 24, property transfer tax exemption for Energy Star mobile homes. So there was a full exemption enacted 2 years ago. So mobile home transfers subject to property transfer tax, if they're Energy Star rated, they are allowed a full exemption. So if you shift all mobile home sales to that, they would be able to take advantage of that. However, if you wanted to keep tax treatment aligned with how property is treated under other areas of the law, you could also create a sales tax exemption for mobile homes that are Energy Star rated. So that's another option. Can I then just walk through the different sections where I'm seeing different tax issues and wanted to flag some concerns that we had? I know you also had some questions I wanted to loop back to, but I'll try and stick to the bill structure as it is. The very small issue that you had talks about with Cameron was in section 3, where LEC, these limited equity cooperatives will be designated as nonprofits if they're mobile home parks. We weren't really clear if the intent here was to not, it sounds like the intent was not to touch any tax treatment, but it should probably be clarified in the bill. It's not really clear as drafted, so that could be potentially concerning if there would be tax benefits available to these, and we would just like clarity to understand how those would be administered. So section 5 and 6 that deal with the sales tax exemption. I guess that's more towards what I was just saying about if you are creating a new exemption, perhaps consider just doing a sales tax exemption for Energy Star homes, and making this full wholesale shift would be pretty unusual to have all mobile homes treated as deeded property.
We could also change the Energy Star part to an exemption from the property transfer tax for Energy Star.
Sure. So that existing law is the full exemption for transfer tax. We were also concerned about, again, I keep reiterating how strange it would be not to have tangible personal property subject to sales tax. Shifting all of these sales might be very confusing for administrators, mainly town clerks. So we would recommend hearing from them. We are not real estate attorney specialists in any way, so definitely recommend hearing from real estate attorneys about these sort of transactions and any complications this might raise. We also have a few technical drafting suggestions if the language stays as is, but it sounds like you might be making some changes throughout. And then those are really all the main points I wanted to make about the shift from sales and use tax to property transfer tax. And then I have many thoughts on the report and what our understanding the bill is trying to get at there, but just want to pause for any questions on it.
So from your perspective, real property versus tangible property. So what you're saying is, and our attorneys alluded to it, tangible property, mobile homes are really tangible property and not treated as real property.
I'm sorry. So under current law, there's a distinction between when they're fixed, that is clear established law. When they're fixed, they are real property. They are transferred as real property, they're subject to property transfer tax. When they're sort of sold off the lot, or being moved, then they're mobile, so they're TPP. Great. So in section 12, I know that we often get questions about, what's the department's role in, just like very high level, in informing towns or doing any sort of auditing function of towns valuation. And just to be clear, PBR's role is very much a guidance, not an auditing function. And the report as drafted currently really feels to us like it's asking us to go audit towns, how they're currently appraising these mobile home parks that are registered as LECs. So that was concerning to us. Currently under current law for limited equity cooperatives, the general rule applies where property is valued at fair market value unless there's some sort of special appraisal. And to our knowledge, there is no special appraisal that applies to LECs. So there isn't any current statute that would allow towns to appraise in any way other than fair market value. And towns certainly do have different approaches to reaching a fair market value number for a property. There are special appraisals like for affordable housing. There's a bunch of different statutes, but none of them really seem to apply to LECs. So in our reading, towns are appropriately appraising these at fair market value. So that was just one sort of like table setting. The way that the report is drafted, it's asking us to go out and sort of inventory and look at all LECs that are mobile home parks, and then analyze their current valuation, which would require us to really dig in with town officials. PBR would have to really literally interview the town officials to find out how they came up with their values. There's nothing in the CAMA system. It's not detailed enough to give PBR. Like we couldn't just neatly pull out, oh, this is how they set this value. They would have to go and do interviews, assuming as well that we could identify them because the grand list does not have does not clearly indicate when an owner is an LLC. It does appear that the Secretary of State has a list. So that would certainly help that way, but there's no other way for PBR to know. This is a town function. So that we were concerned about the workload. Also, again, the role of PBR is not auditing. We do set, I know you're all aware, we do set a few types of properties values like utility and the communications property, which is new. But it's unusual for us to go and say, we think you did or did not do that. So we would assume if this were a charge we were taking on, it would likely require us contracting with an independent expert.
Thank you. Nice to see you in committee.
Thank you.
With regards to appraisals and CAMA, said that they, I guess maybe the listers or somebody were perhaps to interviews. Would that be on a case by case basis, or would there be something that could become more universal?
To be able to meet the charge in the report, we're imagining how we would identify these properties and then go talk to the town. We don't have access to their records to be able to
Okay.
say, this is how the town set this value.
One at a time, basically.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Person Lester?
Just, it seems like we know that, okay, I have something else. Narrowing it down, the LEC, I feel like the ask is not to say, to go to different towns that are appraising LECs and say, you're doing this wrong. It's to say, how are you doing it? So it seems like it would be simple enough, like decent amount of hours, yes, but simple enough to pull the list from the Secretary of State of where the LECs are, go to those towns listers and just say like, hey, how are you doing it? That seems relatively straightforward to me. I'm just trying to understand what the tax department's concerned here. Like, is it just the amount of hours that?
That's certainly part of it, but not the only reason. It does require an examination of any justifications for differences in approach, which is where we were getting sort of, where there was a instinctive PBR reaction of we provide guidance, we don't audit. And also in general, the PBR, even the district attorneys were very knowledgeable folks. Sorry, looking at familiar. They are not, specialists in these sort of appraisals, so they wouldn't want to be stepping out of bounds there.
But these seem like totally different animals. I mean, with a limited equity cooperative, because if you want to transfer your interest in it, you really are left, as far as I understand, from people who have an interest in limited equity cooperatives. They don't really get to take much value with them if they sell. And so the actual value to that person who's a participant is almost zero. So the question is, how do you value that consistently?
It's, yeah, I don't know that I can answer that.
Yeah.
I think that current statute, what I come back to is current statute doesn't make it clear other than doing fair market value. So it is really left up to the expertise of the appraiser to try and determine that. And if the legislature wanted to create a different type of clearer appraisal for these particular properties, it would be helpful to have that clarified.
There's, I think about other parallels that accomplish maybe where the committee was intending. If we think about affordable housing, where there's the fair market value of sort of the highest best use fair market value, and then do a sort of value discount in statute for those properties, rather than saying it's actually the value is diminished. It's that this value is still at highest best.
Exactly. I actually pulled that up just to have it. It's appraised between this is for owner occupied housing, appraised between 60 and 70% of fair market value is current statute. And it just doesn't, the language around what qualifies for this special appraisal does not seem to apply to limited equity cooperatives. Seems pretty clear that they don't qualify, so they aren't getting that lower.
Like on a shared equity model, is that what you're looking at, or is it?
This is within the definition of appraisal value, which sets out the general rule, and then you have all these special appraisals, and affordable housing is one of them. So just comparing the LEC statute that Cameron was walking you through, it doesn't seem to meet this particular appraisal requirement in statute.
I think this would be really interesting information to have, and I want to offer Representative Wozniak that I think it's significantly more complicated than it seems. I know that the committee and Cam spent a bunch of time trying to understand even just a few of them, because they talked to a bunch of folks in my town to try to figure out what happens in Brattleboro, and it was, I don't know if they got clarity. I think that's why they asked Tax to do this. Anything else?
You did have one question I heard about the grand list, how the bill would impact the grand list, and I wasn't sure I'd fully understood it, but was reminded that within the statute that sets out what's in the actual grand list, the grand list content statute, section 4152, it does specifically address mobile homes on the grand list. So it says when the grand list of a town contains a description of a mobile home, whether or not it's considered real or personal property, the description, if available, includes manufacturer, model number, serial number, and dimensions of the home. So it's not, I'm not sure if that's exactly what your question was, but this bill does not impact that statute at the moment. And that's current statute.
I think I was wondering more process-wise, like where the store assessor would get all of that information if the bill of sale didn't have all the information.
Mm-hmm. So one, it wouldn't be on the grand list until it were sort of affixed to the property anyway. I don't know.
Yeah. I think that's more like the deep weeds of the assessors.
I think that would be more of a lister. But maybe somebody at BVR has an intelligent answer I could get for you.
Yeah, thank you. And you're gonna send us your thoughts?
Yes, I will send you my, not all of my notes because you don't want to look at all. I'll send you my high level thoughts.
Cool. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Things, now we have time again. Really? Oh, and Dawn's still here. Do you want to do the first 10 minutes or do you want
Could be
to?
quick intro.
Okay. Yeah,
Sure.
was that a yes?
Yes.
Okay. Folks, we are going to take a deep breath, switch gears. That devotional yesterday was so nice, all that breathing. H750.
All that breathing.
John, do you want to take us, can you take us through that?
I can.
Thank you. Thanks, Ted. And for next, well, John's making his way up here, just for next steps, Representative Wozniak's the liaison to this committee, to the Housing Committee, and so he's gonna check in with the reporter and try to sort of bring some of our questions to them and then work on an amendment and bring it back to us.
Now.
Hello again,
Hello.
still John Gray. Okay. Go. H750. This one I think is relatively simple to explain, but could have a meaningful impact. So the genesis of this is how to deal with proceeding with construction during the currently existing moratorium. Are there things that could be done to remove existing disincentives? It doesn't necessarily incentivize, but I would say it's an attempt to remove some of the disincentives to construction commencing today. So the first, this is page 750, an act relating to school districts pursuing school construction projects during the moratorium on state aid. Section 1 amends the definition of education spending, which includes the way that we define what counts toward excess spending. So on page 2, as you'll know, under existing law, this is lines 11 through 14. Under existing law, all bonds approved by voters prior to July 1, 2024, those voter-approved bond payments for principal and interest will not be included in education spending for purposes of calculating excess spending. So that's existing law, that those approved prior to July 1, 2024, you're not subjected, your school district is not subjected to double taxation for those pieces through the excess spending application. The tweak that's done here is to remove the specific deadline. So this would say that all voter-approved bond payments for principal and interest shall not be included in education spending for purposes of calculating excess spending. Essentially saying that if you approved one today, or you approved one last year, you approved bond payments, those would not subject your district to double taxation through the excess spending. That's the first change. And of course, the consequence of that is that because your district doesn't bear as much of the liability for those costs, they're shifted statewide, right? The funds are still raised statewide in the way that education spending is.
John, could you just quickly explain excess spending in the current law?
Yep.
That's what we're dealing with here, right?
Yep.
Okay.
So the way it works for excess spending is above a given threshold, I think 118% of statewide education spending per pupil. Above that excess spending threshold, any education spending that you have is added to the, just to call out the calculation, the way that your local tax rate is set, you take your education spending and you divide it by the yield rate. So you get a per pupil figure, your per pupil spending in your district, and you divide it by the yield to produce your rate. So it gives you your rate is a function of how it relates to the yield, basically. The way that the excess spending is dealt with is your numerator becomes education spending plus excess spending. Excess spending is already captured in your education spending. So the material effect of that is to subject excess spending twice to the taxation, right? It's double counting it in terms of the per pupil spend that you have. And so it means that your district bears a greater share of the liability. Your tax rates go up higher than they would if you were under the excess spending threshold.
Okay, thanks.
This bill, did this bill go through House Education?
Yes.
Yes.
Did you say?
No,
Yes.
Did it go through there?
no,
They just.
no, no.
Referred to.
No,
us.
it was referred to House Education. Representative Kimball introduced it, it was referred to House Education, and they transferred it
Oh.
back to us, because they decided it was our responsibility, they didn't do hearings on it. Right?
Yes.
Yeah, they didn't vote on it, it was, they just decided it was ours and sent it to us.
We both spoken there, but nothing happened.
The first point you made, I have that down. The second point you made, it's already shipped to be born statewide. Can you give an example with numbers?
I cannot.
But Julia can later, but great.
I need that.
Okay.
I keep hearing different things. Thank you.
Back to you. Jen.
Okay. Section 2, this one's slightly harder to explain, and I may need to pull up section 3445, but I'll come to that in a second. So section 3445 is a section that is in the new state aid for school construction program that was enacted in Act 73. And much like the existing program, which is under moratorium, and this is what I can pull up the statute to show you, but just to explain, you may know that the state aid program requires a preliminary approval. You submit a preliminary application and you also receive a final approval. So there's 2 applications that go to the Secretary of Education. Under the final approval section, some of the language speaks to the fact that you need to receive final approval before you actually commence construction. And the final subdivision of that section points out that if you do commence construction, before you receive that final approval, you will not be reimbursed for any debt that you incurred in anticipation of that final approval. So the way that I think about it, just my read of the section is trying to prevent kind of bad faith acting in this space, that you could submit the final approval, but just start doing the digging, and then you're gonna pick up those costs later, regardless of whether or not you had actually waited for that final approval. So what this section is intended to do is to remove a disincentive to current construction, which would necessarily commence before final approval, because you couldn't receive final approval under the program that doesn't yet exist. It's designating that any construction you commence today, you have good cause for doing so. You're not going to be dinged for commencing that construction today. So that's what this section is saying. Bottom of page 2. Final approval for construction aid, unless approved by the Secretary for good cause in advance of commencement of construction, a school district shall not begin construction before the Secretary approves the final application. And the new language, provided that any school district that commences construction before July 1, 2026 shall be deemed to have good cause. School district may submit a written final application to the Secretary at any time following approval of a preliminary application. I can pull up the section, if helpful, just so you can see the full of subdivision 5. I also see hands.
Oh, sorry.
On the timeline. So this would not apply to projects that were approved last year. This would only apply to projects being approved in the current budget cycle.
This would apply to last year. This would say that if you're seeking state aid, any project is going to need to go through the state aid program, right? But as long as if you commence construction for July 1, 2026, you're picked up by this call out. You would still need to go through the standard process, but you wouldn't be hurt during the process for the fact that you've already commenced construction. So if you approved last year, started digging today, that would conceivably fit within this. You'd still need to receive the approvals, right? It's still dependent on receiving that secretary approval under the program. But assuming you did receive that approval, you would not be hurt by the fact that you had already started construction in advance of that final approval. That's all that this is intended to do, is to say, you're not going to be hurt. You still got to go through all of the normal process, but you won't be hurt for the fact that you've commenced construction.
That's still not understanding. And I think I just need to go back and reconcile, because I thought in the other language on school construction, we were allowing retroactivity, and this is additional.
So this is unrelated to the
And this
pieces
is-
we've done on forgiveness.
And then why is this necessary then if we've already got those other pieces?
So once we understand what John did, it's Representative Kimball's bill and he can answer those questions.
I think of this as separate from,
Okay,
from
They're
the,
totally separate
okay.
pieces of legislation.
I know they're separate pieces of legislation. I'm just not sure why we need both.
I'm gonna pull up the broader section just so you can see the context.
So John, too, if that approval doesn't come, what happens?
You would then not be receiving state aid. Yep. That's correct. So, I mean, that's part of the genesis of the bill too, is that it's really difficult to provide any meaningful assurances to districts because there's so much uncertainty in the school construction space. But this is a bill that makes targeted interventions where you can offer something, the way that I would.
And just to follow up, is there anything in here that states that the school district has to approve of that project?
You would have to have the bond approved by the voters of the district to be, yep, that's one of the requirements for seeking approval. Here is the section, it's Title 16, 3445. We were just looking at an amendment to subdivision A. So unless approved for good cause, school district shall not begin construction. And I'm just going to scroll down quickly to D, which is the relevant piece here. A district may begin that construction upon receipt of final approval. However, a district shall not be reimbursed for debt incurred due to borrowing of funds in anticipation of aid. Which is, we're speaking to that bad faith piece, but this is saying you have good cause to commence. If you've commenced before a given date, July 1, 2026, shouldn't be hurt for that very reason. Still need to comply with everything else about the program. And that is it.
Does this mean, frankly, like that if a district if a district votes a bond before we set up an entire school construction program, then it's treated as if it went through the entire program?
It's not treated as if it went through the program. It would still have to jump through the hurdles of receiving approval from the secretary, doing all the standard pieces here. It's just that this piece A is saying you're not going to get money back if you've taken out debt expecting to be reimbursed for it, right? But of course, you would necessarily be doing that if you're commencing construction today and the program doesn't yet exist. I guess you could make the alternative argument that because you commenced today and no program yet exists that could support it, how could you possibly be anticipating reimbursement? But this is to be clear that you're saying.
Yeah.
Sure. You're welcome to stay there or go.
I'll stay
over
here,
there.
yeah.
Does that mean I need to stay here?
I mean, this proposal recognizes kind of the current state we're in and also recognizes there is a future state down the road. And that in the current state, there are school facilities that need to be improved. But because it is either unhealthy for the students to continue in there or they're falling apart. And so it's to remove that penalty for excess spending. The penalty is, I think, 16,400, 700, 400, somewhere around there. And that the debt service would definitely kick a lot of those schools into the excess spending threshold. In my district, I happen to represent one such project, which is going to vote next week on a $111 million bond to rebuild the school. Also recognizing that we're in the state where we haven't yet designated what that school configuration looks like for the future. And knowing that state aid would be dependent on it complying with all of those things we've envisioned in Act 73, that it would be part of that total regional solution. So that was the purpose in doing this. Mountain View School District defeated their school bond vote of $99 million 2 years ago. And it was, a couple of towns voted enough. We have 7-member towns, but 20 different students 20 different communities send students to that school. So it's already kind of a hub school. And the school board felt like it was really important to come back because a number of things have happened recently. The sewage was backing up in the locker room during one of the basketball games. It also does back up in the cafeteria. The heating system has to be replaced. The 1958 boiler has finally shot the bed. So it's it doesn't really meet a lot of fire code. So the building itself needs a total revamp. So that's from a very local standpoint, but it's not different around different places in the state. Hartford needs to address its own PCB issues. We were talking before about what's going on in Newport. So this is really to provide some kind of avenue for those schools that need to make that improvement. Removing the excess spending threshold is a part of that, so that you're not spending more, you're taxing twice those students that really need it. So that's the proposal. And if the school does meet those criteria in the future state, then it would be eligible for state aid. So that's the whole proposal. Really simple.
Madam Chairman.
Go for it.
So Charlie, the July 1, 2026 date.
So the state aid for school construction is supposed to be effective July 1st, 2026. So this is saying that that program doesn't exist yet, but it will exist after July 1st, 2026. As we know, we have not yet found a funding source for it. So we don't know what might be available. So that's why it's July 1st, 2026.
Representative Bigley?
Lieutenant Kimball, so I think you said it as well. So these folks that proceed on their own and start this through bonding or whatever it is, and there is some money eventually that they would qualify. What's the anticipation of not even, if there's so many of these folks that actually do it, it sounds like there are now, but, and there's not nearly enough money to do it. Is there a setup for first come, first serve, or partial payment? How, any projection as to how that would work?
That's a great question. I think that's an us question. We haven't figured that out as a body as to how to look at that. It's a first come, first serve, a certain fixed amount per year. And then we had discussion we looked at the other day that was looking at a grant that would pay for 100% of the debt service. So recognizing that that is far off, thinking that as long as the program may exist sometime in the future, because in the bill, Act 73, it says 20 to 40% of whatever the debt service cost will be supported by the state. So it's really trying to recognize what is in that bill.
So really, this is just covering the first part, which is the excess spending, not being hit twice in a sense.
Excess spending, yes. And then anything that may be available in the future from state aid, if it is in that form of debt service payments from the state or whatever that looks like.
So again, I guess my question there is, though, shouldn't there be a qualifier for that?
There is, in that sense, that it would have to receive preliminary approval and otherwise qualify for construction aid.
And so in the example, you used an example of White River having needs, Hartford having needs and Woodstock having needs. And in most scenarios I've seen for regional high schools, Woodstock and Hartford share a regional high school. And so what happens if they both move forward with this, qualify for that, and then?
Yeah, I mean, so Woodstock definitely wants right now, Mountain Views wants to be the regional high school, recognizing that that is not a shared opinion right now. And so, but it would have to, in the future configuration, meet whatever the district needs, whatever that district configuration is. So that is a big unknown.
I guess I'm worried about us, if approving this, spending statewide ed fund dollars on both of those scenarios and creating a situation where frankly, two existing districts are fighting it out by investing early, hoping that one of them will win the day on where their school is located.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah, okay.
And again, coming back to what is that regional solution look like?
Yeah.
We don't yet know.
I know, it's really, yeah, we are stuck in a holding pattern.
Reason that we put the date in that we did, so it wouldn't be a rush to the ballot box.
Yep.
To build before we had the rest of everything.
There already has been a rush to the ballot, and this is actively discussed in our side of the street. People are absolutely rushing to the ballot box and to do construction, absolutely, because then you are likely to be the designated high school.
I don't know if that's in the cards or what's the strategy for the school that I represent. But they know that this has been in the making since 2016 in terms of evaluating the school, having a full engineering report, coming to the voters once, coming back to the voters again. So it's not coming out of the blue.
Thanks.
I have a question, if that's what's happening, But they aren't covered, it's gonna be counted toward excess spending, but they're willing to spend have it count toward excess spending, thinking that then they're gonna be okay because they'll be covered with state aid education. But we put that to
We also have a finite, there's a finite number of high schools we're gonna build. That's what this is about. And so the issue is if you have a finite number of schools that make sense as regional high schools, and we have a finite number of facilities we can support. The reason I asked if this had gone to health education is it seems like this decision should be part of that broader conversation around regional high schools. And I say that with deep love and appreciation. Your building has been failed for years. I mean, I want to acknowledge that, but I also know other districts who held off and didn't rush to vote this year because they feel like the universe is turned upside down.
No, it's,
I don't know what the fair thing is to do.
we've left buildings and districts in a holding pattern on this for an extraordinarily long time.
But it's worse than that. It's not, we have abandoned them, but we also have no ability, and this is again why I support, I think we need to talk about regional shared services, because we actually have no vehicle for having regional conversations around what makes sense. I'll pick another region, this region, to go out with a bond proposal for a CTE center that adds 300 seats when you've already got 800 too many seats in this, or whatever it is, 700 in this region. We need to have the ability to talk about how many seats we need in the region, and then what is the right physical configuration to support that.
Absolutely.
And my fear of this is that it's getting out of the gate, but it's not part of a coordinated strategy. And districts can't do this by themselves. They need some kind of regional capacity to have those conversations.
I think that folks had some questions for Julia, so I'm gonna ask her to join in.
And I appreciate the concerns, absolutely.
And here, I hear the septic issues you described, it's not just this year. I know it's been
Yeah.
going on very long.
Hi, Julie Richter, JFO. There is a fiscal note for H750 on the committee page under my name. I don't know if you want me to walk through that or if you want me to talk more high level or answer questions, what works best.
I think we don't have time for a full fiscal note, and I feel like there was one very specific question that I don't remember who it was from or what it was. I don't think it was yours.
It's okay.
That's okay, but no one, okay.
Oh,
I thought it was
Mark's.
Mark's.
You were asking the.
Oh, it was yours first, yes.
This is your question. It's your question about the ed fund being self-balancing. And so, and cost being shared across the ed fund is your question.
It's cost being shared across the ed fund. Someone tells me it's a certain way, I hear it's not that way, I want to know what your opinion is. On the fact.
You asked the question.
Happy to about what?
Oh, you're building a high school.
Yeah.
Charlie's, Representative Kimball's area starts to build a high school.
Who pays the bond?
Somebody's already built a high school, Winooski, and they're spending X amount of dollars a year to do that. And this doesn't involve the excess spending threshold. This is just, how is the ed fund helping them, or is it not, to build that high school? Where is the burden falling for those?
So assuming that there's no federal dollars going to that high school,
And no federal.
going to that debt service, the ed fund is covering the entirety of the debt service because we have a statewide education fund. The question is, how are tax rates impacted by the debt service? So we have our statewide education fund. And if you think about the way that the homestead property tax rate is calculated, it's a district's spending per pupil divided by the statewide homestead yield, which you all are grappling with setting. The statewide homestead yield is a direct function of how much needs to be raised in the education fund, right? The lower the yield, the higher the homestead property tax. So the more that needs to be raised for the education fund, because the absent anything else, the more costs in the education fund, like debt service, the lower the yield needs to be to raise sufficient funds for debt service. So everybody's property taxes across the state are going up to support that debt service, that bond. The question, the next step though, is, well, what about the homestead property taxpayers in the district with the debt service? They too are seeing a lower yield because there's more cost to be paid out of the education fund. But they also are increasing their education spending, all else equal, by adding that debt service, which means an increase in per pupil spending. So that district that is carrying the bond, that is responsible for paying the debt service, even though it is all statewide education dollars, that debt service cost is sitting in both per pupil spend, which is in the numerator, and in the statewide yield, which is in the denominator.
I think that is a great place for us to stop. And I'm gonna encourage folks to read the fiscal note. You can have Julia back to go into it in more depth. And we can maybe see what happens when we have this conversation combined with our other school construction conversation. Forward for all of the kids.